being here this morning. Encourage you to ask questions, listen in, spark connections. And I'm going to turn it over to Jill. Thank you, Jill.
Hello. Oh boy.
Right? It's strong.
I feel really powerful.
You are powerful.
All right. Hello, my name is Jill Woodworth, and I am not a cannabis entrepreneur. I am not necessarily in the cannabis industry. I am just a mom, and no, I hate saying just a mom. I'm going to say it that way for the start of this story. Really honored and excited to be here, and I think it goes without saying that no one ever gets here by themselves. Just have a village that has supported me, including my friend Lisa sitting down there. But thank you for coming in and listening to me. I feel like I have a really important story to tell you about my journey as a special needs parent, or just as a parent, as a human being, and how I found my way to using cannabis as a transformative tool, and so much more. So I'm going to start at a certain point in my story, and it's going to weave around a little bit. So I like to say, buckle up. But yeah, buckle up. So like I said, I am a parent of 5, and I still am living, but I was living in a very different situation than I am now. I was married and like a mother of 5, and 3 of my children carry a diagnosis of tuberous sclerosis complex, which is a rather complex condition that causes benign tumors to grow in different organs of the body. So, I was going along in my life and have these kids with this diagnosis, and there's a genetic component, and that's a whole nother story, but to stay on track here, the weight of their care, or the demands that required of me, was pretty significant. I spent, like I said, it causes benign tumors to grow in different organs of the body, so you are completely dependent on the medical systems, the caregiving systems in our society. And I was like this super mom, going from one appointment to the next. There was a lot of testing involved, a lot of treatments and procedures and medications, and just being the type of person that was a go-getter. I wanted to stay on top of it. I was just running around chasing this treatment, chasing that treatment, going, and a lot of emergencies were happening. I was starting to witness my children having like seizures at times for like 3-hour seizures. My daughter ended up having brain surgery. So as you can imagine, like, it started out being okay, like I could manage things, but as they got older, the symptoms of their condition started to be much more prevalent, and I was learning and educating myself. It was like chasing a dragon. I could never really get on top of it, and so I started to drink a lot more. I actually ended up using my kids' medications illegally, and just trying to survive. Looking back, I realize now that I was dealing with not only watching them be traumatized, basically, medical trauma, and I was secondhand, like watching your kid get a mask forced on their face, or have their head cut open going into brain surgery, and like wondering some days whether they'd wake up in the morning. It was that level of stress. And granted, they were fairly, I don't want to say they were stable, but they weren't where I needed to worry that they were going to wake up in the morning. But that just to demonstrate the level of demands. And so anyway, so I was, I started drinking all the time, and really kind of practicing a lot of escape behaviors, which in retrospect, I know I had a lot of trauma that I just hadn't been able to really access, or to understand how to integrate, how to walk through. I don't even know if there's a way to do it when you're in these types of situations. So my life really started to fall apart. And one of the significant things that happened was my daughter was going into brain surgery, and I was with her in the waiting room before she went into the operating room, and I looked over in the trash, and there was a tube of propofol, which I had, surprisingly enough, knew what it was. I spent a lot of time researching ways to alter my consciousness using whatever I could find in my house. You know, I just wanted to be checked out. I didn't want to die. I just wanted to alter it. So I grabbed this propofol out of the trash and put it in my backpack. And she went through brain surgery, and she was fine, as fine as you could be. But I forgot that I had this propofol in my backpack, and my husband at the time found it, and a friend of mine found it, and they were like, you know, that's just too much. You've got to go to treatment. So I ended up going into a detox, and then into, you know, treatment for alcoholism, and went into the AA program. And I'm going to tell you that was like the first step of me being aware that I needed to participate in, no matter what was going on around me, I needed to take some responsibility for my behaviors. And so I went right into that, and I was trying to stay sober, going to these AA meetings, trying to do the 12 steps. I don't know how much familiarity any of you have out there with the AA curriculum, but you know, there's the 12 steps. It's a beautiful program in lots of ways, and I made a lot of friends. But I was still living in the same situation. As you can imagine, my relationship had deteriorated significantly. I was having affairs. I was just a hot mess, I'd like to say, still, even though I was in this program of recovery. And, you know, again, looking back, I feel I've learned a lot about trauma and repression, and realizing that AA doesn't necessarily address that. So I couldn't really do the 12 steps. I felt like this sense of failure, this pervasive sense of failure. Like, even though I was in recovery, you know, other people's lives were tremendously improved, and I was still like dealing with major relationship problems, and my kids were definitely not like getting better. And so I still was in the same circle, but I was sober. And also I will say that when I was in recovery, I was put on a number of medications, which is what they do in recovery. And I had been on antidepressants for a very long time in my life. So there was that. But I felt like they were kind of, you know, numbing me out a little bit. I wasn't quite as engaged as I could be. And anyways, one of my friends, a family friend that was hanging out with me, suggested that I use cannabis. And I was like, why is she telling me that? I'm in recovery. Doesn't she know that? That's like forbidden. When you are in AA program, I don't know how it is today, but that was definitely a big no-no. So, but I thought to myself, well, maybe she's right. I'm still really anxious. I'm still on all these medications. Everything's like still spinning around me. And so I decided, okay, I'm gonna try a little cannabis. And I really had no background in any kind of that cannabis could be a medicine or anything. And she said to me, I'll never forget this, she said, Jill, no, cannabis has a spiritual component. You're missing the whole point of why people use this and why you might be able to get something from it. It's not just this, it's not a party drug. And in many ways, I don't really even see it as a drug necessarily, but at that point, it was breaking through a lot of my awarenesses of what cannabis was. And so I was like, okay, I'm gonna try some cannabis. And at the same time, I'm still going to this recovery program that is definitely not in support of that. I have a sponsor in AA who is definitely not in support of that kind of a technique. And me still be kind of an addict mentality, not really been able to integrate a lot of the traumas and walk through this. I went from, not using cannabis at all to using it 24/7. And I remember it was like I had not used it without drinking. I mean, I'd used cannabis before that, but it was always mixed with like the partying that it didn't seem special to me. But I remember when I had stopped drinking, I was still on the psych meds, using cannabis. I was like, wow, this is like a whole new world. I'm a runner, I would go on runs, and I felt like I was in a different dimension, and it was just so wonderful. It was such a break from the reality that I was living in. And like I said, I was using cannabis 24/7, and everything was still going on around me, all the trauma and the crises with my kids. I was trying to stay on top of it, be a good mom, but I still, this fact that I was using this substance that wasn't really part of the AA curriculum was bugging me. I felt guilty all the time. I'd go to meetings, I'd feel guilty, and it was playing to this whole guilt thing that I had going on. And so, and I knew on some level that it wasn't what I had thought it was. But I still felt the weight of the shame and the guilt. And so, but I was still, I was like, well, it's helping me somehow. I'm just going to keep using it. And again, like I said, 24/7 using it. And what ended up happening was I'd been partying, well, not really partying, but I'd stayed up really late. I think I smoked a water bomb. And I was preparing to confront my husband, who's now my ex-husband, as you might imagine. He was coming up the driveway, and I'd gotten really high the night before. I don't think I'd slept much. And I started to have this really weird experience where I felt like I wasn't quite in my body. And I was like standing on my porch, and he was pulling up the driveway, and I felt like I was going up into these dimensions of the universe, and then I'd be coming back down, and really just acting kind of weird. And so he came home. Of course, I didn't confront him about anything because I was tripping, and which was basically what was happening. And so, so this continued to happen. This is like in one day, and he and my other friend, the same friend that suggested I use cannabis, was there, and they were like, we better call the ambulance. She's acting really weird. So I'm like, okay. Well, at the same time, I was still having all these thoughts that I felt like I didn't have control completely of them. Wasn't controlling what I was saying. So a significant experience. We were waiting for the ambulance to come, and I was standing on the edge of my porch, and I'm not sure where my head was then, but I decided that I was going to jump off the porch. I don't know where I thought I'd go. It wasn't like I was gonna kill myself or anything, but I may have injured myself, and my friend saw that this is going to happen, and she grabbed me from behind, and these awarenesses at the same time are coming in, like there's the ambulance. You're going to have to get up, and you're going to have to walk out to the ambulance. So I did. I was like, oh crap, I'm gonna have to walk out now and get in this ambulance. Probably means I'm going to the psych ER, probably means I'm going to have to go through treatment again, and it was just really heavy. And as I was walking to the ambulance, I felt like I was about 2 feet outside my body, and I was saying all these things that I didn't have control of, and there was some dark shit. I was just spewing things about my ex-husband and my friend, which may or may not have been true, but just all kinds of dark shit. And here's the ambulance pulled up, and there's the cops on the front lawn, and all the firefighters, and my ex-husband was a firefighter. And here I come, this mother of five, out to the ambulance, and just desperate to not go through this again, and still completely out of my mind, and go into the ambulance. And my thought was, well, I'm gonna try to get out of this, so I offer the EMT a blowjob. Really not my proudest moment. But of course he was like, they knew I was nutty. They were very, very kind to me. And I'm driving in the ambulance. Again, it's just this feeling like I'm in a play. Like I'm coming back down into my body, and I'm like, the world is a play. And I'm just, I'm seeing all these things. And it was so terrifying. I'm talking about it as if it's funny, and it is to me now. I have a lot of compassion for myself, and it is kind of funny, but at the time it was so terrifying. I had no knowledge of tripping. I'd never ever done that. I mean, I'd gotten drunk, and I'd done all the the regular party things, but I'd never used psilocybin or any kind of that type of psychedelic medicine. So, but I definitely was tripping. So I'm in the ambulance, and we get to the hospital. Again, I'm in and out of my body, and you're probably wondering why this is great about cannabis, but it gets better. So I'm in the hospital, and the doctors are all gathered around, and they're asking me, what day it is, where are you? And I was failing at all the questions. And finally something clicked, and I came back to my senses a little bit, and I looked at my ex-husband and my friend standing there, and I saw their faces, and I was like, I hadn't completely remembered what I said, and I was like, oh my God, this is really bad. So they ended up leaving, and they were basically observing me. I think I begged them to put it down as a marijuana overdose, which is kind of funny. It was really more of a psychotic break or an out-of-body experience. And I was trying to explain it to people, and they looked at me like, of course, I was crazy. This was 2012, so there wasn't like the level of awareness there is now that this could be something that that psychedelics are actually can be a therapeutic experience. But there was one nurse in the ER that actually listened to me. She must have had a background in spirituality or something that gave her the ability to listen to me, and she validated what I said. She was like, I believe that happened to you, Jill. I really do. And just hearing those words at that point, I was like, okay, somebody believes me. Maybe I'm not completely crazy, but they discharged me. I did not have my cell phone. I think I had my purse. I had no shoes. I had socks on. And so I'm leaving UMass. They're a mental health place, and I have nowhere to go. I know my husband pretty much hates me right then, and I've got to find a way to get home. So I go to the I think there were phones there that you could use. I don't even know if I had my cell phone. Anyways, I call him and I beg him to please come get me. He was like, no way, you're out, it's done, never coming home. I just begged, and finally he said he'd pick me up. And so I walked from the phone where I talked to him to sit down at UMass, the waiting room out there, waiting for him to come get me. And I remember being at just like the lowest point. I was like, well, I may be living on the street. I may lose my kids. I really don't know what's going to happen. And as that, I was having these thoughts, like the crushing, I felt like this light come in. And definitely in a spiritual aspect, I felt like a sense of love and like a solidity that I knew no matter what, I was going to be okay. I knew it wasn't going to be easy. And but this sense of being surrounded by something bigger than me, maybe you could call it God or source or light, whatever. It was just so prevalent. So I walked, I was like, I'm going to be able to get through this. I knew I would get through it. I got out and got in the car with my ex-husband, who didn't believe a word I said. He's like, you're out of here tomorrow. And here I am, this mom of 4 kids living with me at the time. And just like, I have no idea what I'm gonna do. And thank God I was still in AA, because I called my sponsor. And she's like, well, you relapsed, so, no big deal. I'll come help you out. And she scooped me up, and I went and lived with friends that I'd met in the program for a while, and went back into treatment. And I probably scared a lot of people from using marijuana, because I told them my story. And it probably horrified a lot of people. And I was very negative about it for a while. But something about the experience that actually could happen, that you could alter your perception in ways that you could see things so differently, was really profound to me, and it stuck with me. But I knew I had to follow the program. At that point, I was going through a divorce. And so I had to be letter to the law. I had to, stay sober. But I was on like 6 or 7 different psych meds at the time, and still trying to do these 12 steps while the kids were going to the doctors and going to their treatments. And so I ended up being able to move out of my house that I was living with. I couldn't afford to stay in the house with my ex-husband. We were going through the divorce, and I moved with my kids. I ended up getting custody. I don't know how, because my behavior had been pretty horrible, but I think I'd been their caregiver for so long that I knew the diagnosis pretty well, and I think they would have been at risk if I didn't have custody. And I was determined to really do my best for them and for myself. So we moved to this tenement building, in a town nearby. I never imagined that my quality of, quote unquote, quality of life, I would be living someplace like this. I would be completely dependent on the, food stamps and, whatever support I could get. I was having therapists for my kids. Like, there was a lot of behavioral issues that come with these diagnoses, and They're also on a significant number of meds, but I was so committed. I had people coming into the house, like not 24/7, but therapists coming in. I discovered any tool out there that would support me. I would take it in. And so I was just a good doobie. I was doing it all right and whatnot. But I still felt this sense of like, I can't really do the 12 steps. I felt like I needed to like destroy myself in order to be able to forgive myself on some level for what I'd done. I didn't understand that I had been deeply traumatized and living in cycles of trauma. So what ended up happening was, like I said, I'm a runner, and I would go on runs, and I started listening to podcasters. And I never knew about podcasting. I thought it was weird and whatnot, and all of a sudden I started listening to these podcasters, and I liked new ideas, and I was listening to like Joe Rogan and Tim Ferriss, and they were talking about ways to like improve your body, and there's kind of like the leading edge, like they were pushing the edge of what we understood in terms of, I don't want to say medicine, but just what the human body was capable of. And psychedelics came up. They started talking about psychedelics, and they were talking about cannabis and how it could be used therapeutically. And I was like, that's really interesting. And at the same time, legislation in Massachusetts had gotten to the point where it was legal to get a card. You could get a medical card. And I had a few friends that also were questioning the AA program, one who's sitting right there with me, that I met in the halls, and we'd meet together at this coffee shop, and we'd talk about getting our medical cards and how we didn't, we really felt like we weren't rocking with the program so much anymore. So I felt like I had some support with these badass rebel ladies that were willing to not follow this program. So anyways, we all got our cards, or one of us was a caregiver. Anyway, so I started using edible cannabis, and I treated it like a science experiment. I would write down in my journal, and I combined it with a little kratom. I don't know if you've heard of kratom. It's another plant medicine that is often misunderstood, easily abused, but is a wonderful tool. So I would combine a little edible cannabis and a little kratom, and I would go out for these runs. And I started being able to so I was really like intense physical exercise. It was like I was, again, in another dimension, but this time it was more purposeful. And I would come back and I would journal about what, the thoughts that came up, the feelings, and I was able to get the insight into my own actions, what had kind of happened in my life to the deterioration of my relationship, just my own personal self-respect. I was able to slowly start to put the pieces together. And for a mother just to be able to come back from something like I had come back psychologically, it was just like baby steps, but I was doing it. And I thought about seeing a therapist. I had a boyfriend, who's still my boyfriend, but he was a cannabis user, which is interesting. I met him before I really started using cannabis, but I said, maybe I should see a therapist or whatever. And he's like, well, it seems like you're getting a lot of insight from what you're doing. I don't know whether you really need to. And I didn't know if I could ever trust a therapist to share the things the way my life had unraveled. So I didn't use a therapist. I kind of was a self-healer and whatnot. And what started to happen was I really started trusting my intuition. I knew that I needed to find some kind of sense of purpose. I didn't really have a career. I tried to go back and get my certification to be an addiction counselor, but the needs of my kids were so demanding that my son started having terrible behavior problems, and I couldn't complete my training for that. So what came to me was the idea of starting a podcast. And like I said, these amazing ideas would come through when I was out having basically a psychedelic experience. And so I had this idea. I remember I was very active in advocacy for the condition that my kids have. And I went to this conference in Dallas, and there's all these parents there and all these doctors, and you went to these kind of like this, like a convention, and you go to these sessions, and there's a lot of education. And I was pretty horrified because I was hearing these sessions about all these treatments that had come about while I was out partying and drinking, and I'd missed these things about that might have helped my kids. And I was like, oh my God, again, feeling this terrible weight of guilt. And I remember being in the hotel room with my mother, and I was still listening to podcasts and whatnot, and the idea came to me, well, why don't you start a podcast and start talking to the parents? Because nobody's asking them any questions about what their experience is of having this condition. It's all the doctors telling them what should happen. And I was like, I'm going to do that. And I had no idea how to do it. I'd never done an interview before. And I started to reach out and talk to these parents or these people that have this condition, and recording them. And I used my phone. I'd record phone calls, upload them to a podcast platform. I had no idea how easy it was. And I was getting this information out there to this community with these parents, and I was getting these stories, these gut-wrenching stories just like mine. And I felt so validated, that other people were willing to share, this like horrible things that happen to the families. And I felt like I was really engaged in a lot of purpose. My friend Lisa offered to get involved in helping me with this podcast and, editing the podcast. And we ended up making it a business. And again, these ideas of who to talk to, what direction to take this podcast in, all came through my psychedelic experience. And so that was kind of an offshoot of it. And what I learned, I ended up interviewing the parents and then broadening the podcast to more about autism, because that's a huge component of the condition that my kids have. There's a lot of crossover, a neurological condition, and started interviewing people more in autism. And then I heard about this guy that was using cannabis to help his kid, or help a kid with autism. And I was like, oh my gosh, I gotta find out about that. So I started interviewing people in the cannabis industry, and wow, was that life-changing. I did start implementing some with my children, with one of my children, which was quite an eye-opening experience. And I realized that the levels of complication when you have a kid on multiple medications, you can't just necessarily throw cannabis in there. But I was learning, I was educating myself. I felt like I was educating the community. A lot of these people had no idea that cannabis could be a tool, that we even had an endocannabinoid system. I had no idea about that. And looking back, I believe, so many of us are walking around without a balanced endocannabinoid system. And truly, I was supplementing my endocannabinoid system. And I know that when it's not in balance, you are more prone to all kinds of things, to chronic illness, to the effects of different chronic illnesses, or they're more easily taking hold if your system's out of balance. So, I was learning this whole scientific component and really trying to make an impact on the community of the people that have this condition. Very, very difficult, running uphill into the wind, getting people to try to understand how important these alternative tools I felt are. I still feel so much passion that we have a lot of these rare illnesses and chronic illnesses, and we're only looking at very narrow ways of treating them. And I believe the whole notion of finding a cure out there that we dangle in front of a lot of are more props for finding more medicines that can profit. And I think there's a huge profit motive and just a lot of twisted ways that our system is like railroaded us into thinking that there's only one way to do things. And I think that's what I want to speak to, to wrap things up here and take any questions, especially as a parent, as a mom. My heart bleeds for myself in lots of ways, that I got to the point, we are sacred, we are divine, and we are human. And I got to the point where I was willing to jump off into, I had nothing left. I had gotten to the bottom of my life and I saw no hope. And when cannabis opened, I'm not saying there's not other ways to get there, But it's just a beautiful tool that I find really unique. That just opens doors of perception, and really I think it's a threat in a lot of ways, because I did start asking questions. Got insight from kind of bird's eye, like you can look down on things and kind of see the connectivity, and really again, I'm always impressed with how much I can shift out of this like tight, rigid, controlled, programmed way of experiencing life to a much more open-hearted, open, spontaneous way to experience life. And I can tell you right now, I am not rich. I am still really low budget. It's not like my life has changed and I'm suddenly this like living in a different, I'm still very much involved in managing my kids' cares. They've all gone on different paths or in different places. But my sense of purpose, who I am as a female, as sacred, as divine, is intact. And I feel like that is a gift that I've gotten from this experience as well. And I feel like so many, the special needs kids that have this absolutely need cannabis. But I want to mention the caregivers and the parents. You know, when you're on a plane, they tell you to take the mask first. And I think in a lot of ways we've lost that. We've lost that notion in our special needs care, any elderly, any oppressed, marginalized group. We are all out for the person that has the condition or whatever, and we forget about ourselves. And I completely forgot about myself. And I just think that all special needs caregivers should have access to the plant, and everybody should, absolutely. And what more of an important group, because there's like the kid or the individual that has the diagnosis, and there's this whole community around them that tanks when they tank. And if the caregiver doesn't have the heart and the ability to feel their way through these things, and it's just I'd say you're circling the drain of despair. I see some really tough things that don't make sense, that aren't fair every day, but I don't feel that sense of despair. I have a deep faith that, I'm not going to paint rose-colored glasses over it and say everything's going to be okay. All I know is that I will be able to walk through it. And so that's my speech about cannabis and how it can be transformative. So thank you very much. And if you have any questions, I am more than happy.
Thank you for sharing your
You're welcome.
story.